Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Halloween in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Explain Movie Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Halloween. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by Explain Movie. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, to all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. Halloween is a 2018 American slasher film directed by David Gordon Green and co-written by Green, Jeff Fradley, and Andi McBride. It is the 11th installment in the Halloween film series and a soft reboot that serves as a direct sequel to the first film and disregards all previous sequels. The film stars Jamie Lee Curtis, who reprises her role as Laurie Strode. James Jude Courtney portrays Michael Myers, with Nick Castle returning to the role for a cameo. Halloween also stars Judy Greer, Andi Matichak, Will Patton, Haluk Bilginer, and Virginia Gardner. Its plot follows a post-traumatic Laurie Strode, who prepares to face an escaped Michael Myers in a final showdown on Halloween night, 40 years after she survived his killing spree. After the release of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, the 2009 sequel to the 2007 remake of the original, 2 consecutive follow-ups went into development from former rights holder Dimension Films, respectively, but neither came to fruition. As a result, the studio lost the rights to the intellectual property, which were later obtained by Blumhouse Productions with John Carpenter's involvement. Carpenter, who disagreed with the remake's portrayal of lead killer Michael Myers, planned on helping the studio to make the next Halloween film into what he believed to be more terrifying than the preceding sequels. Filmmakers David Gordon Green and Andi McBride, who were already fans, proposed their vision to Blumhouse and Carpenter. It was accepted and developed into a sequel to the original. Halloween was filmed from January to February 2018 in Charleston, South Carolina, before reshoots took place that June. The film premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 8, 2018. It was theatrically released in North America on October 19, 2018 by Universal Pictures. The film received generally positive reviews from critics, with praise for Curtis's performance, Green's direction, scares, and tone, with many deeming it both the best Halloween film since the original and a return to form for the series. It was a box office success, grossing over $259 million worldwide. It is the highest-grossing slasher film in unadjusted dollars, breaking a record that Scream had previously set in 1996, as well as setting several other box office records. The film was followed by 2 sequels, Halloween Kills 2021 and Halloween Ends 2022. Plot: on October 29, 2018, infamous serial killer Michael Myers, who has been institutionalized at Smith's Grove Psychiatric Hospital for 40 years following his killing spree in Haddonfield, is being prepared for transfer to a maximum security prison. True crime podcasters Aaron Corey and Dana Haynes visit the hospital, where Aaron displays Michael's mask to him, to no effect. In Haddonfield, Laurie Strode still lives in fear of him, drinking heavily and rarely leaving her heavily fortified house. She has a strained relationship with her daughter Karen, whom the state took away from her when Karen was 12. Allison, Laurie's granddaughter, tries to maintain a relationship with her grandmother. The night of October 30th, as Michael is being transferred, the bus crashes and Michael escapes after murdering 2 people and stealing their truck. On the morning of October 31st, Michael sees Aaron and Dana visiting his sister Judith's grave. He kills them both, as well as a mechanic for his coveralls, before recovering his mask from Aaron's car. Laurie learns of Michael's escape and attempts to warn Karen, but Karen dismisses her concerns, urging Laurie to move on. That night, Allison finds her boyfriend, Cameron, cheating on her at a party and leaves with his friend Oscar. Allison's best friend Vicky and her boyfriend Dave are both killed by Michael. Deputy Frank Hawkins, who arrested Michael in 1978, and Laurie overhear the incident on radio and go over to the house. Laurie sees Michael for the first time in 40 years and shoots him before he flees. The police take Laurie, Karen, and her husband Ray to Laurie's home for protection. Dr. Ranbir Sartain, Michael's psychiatrist and former student of Dr. Samuel Loomis, persuades Sheriff Barker to help in the hunt for Michael. Michael kills Oscar, but Hawkins and Sartain rescue Allison. Deputy Hawkins incapacitates Michael and tries to kill him, but Dr. Sartain, who has become obsessed with Michael, attacks and leaves Hawkins for dead. It is revealed that he orchestrated Michael's escape to study him in the wild. Sartain heads toward Laurie's home with an unconscious Michael and Allison locked in the back seat together. Michael wakes up and kills Sartain while Allison flees. Michael then kills the two police officers stationed outside Laurie's home and strangles Ray to death. In Michael's showdown with Laurie, he stabs her and pushes her over a balcony. When he goes to check her body, he finds it missing, reminiscent of their first encounter decades earlier. Karen shoots him in the cheek before Laurie traps him inside the safe room with Karen and Allison's help. The trio sets the house ablaze, and Laurie says goodbye to Michael before she faints. As her family takes her to the hospital, a final shot of the burning basement is shown, with Michael nowhere in sight. In a post-credits scene, Michael's breathing is heard, indicating that he has survived. Cast, main article, list of Halloween characters. Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode, the sole survivor of Michael Myers' 1978 killing spree, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Judy Greer as Karen Nelson, nee Strode, Laurie's estranged daughter. Sophia Miller as young Karen. Andi Matichak as Allison Nelson, Karen's daughter and Laurie's granddaughter. James Jude Courtney as Michael Myers, the Shape, the masked figure who carried out a horrific massacre on Halloween in 1978 and returns to Haddonfield for another killing spree. Nick Castle as Michael Myers. Haluk Bilginer as Dr. Ranbir Sartain, Michael's psychiatrist and Samuel Loomis's former student. Will Patton as Deputy Frank Hawkins, a sheriff's deputy who teams up with Laurie in an effort to kill Michael and had arrested Michael after his killing spree in 1978. Ryan Reese as Dana Haynes, a true crime podcaster and Aaron's partner. Jefferson Hall as Aaron Corey, a true crime podcaster and Dana's partner. Toby Huss as Ray Nelson, Karen's husband, Allison's father, and Laurie's son-in-law. Virginia Gardner as Vicky, Allison's best friend. Dylan Arnold as Cameron Elam, Allison's boyfriend and son of Lonnie Elam. Miles Robbins as Dave, Vicky's boyfriend. Drew Scheid as Oscar, Cameron's best friend. Jabriel Nantambu as Julian Morrissey, a little boy whom Vicky babysits. Michael Harity as Warden Kuhneman. Omar Dorsey as Sheriff Barker, Haddonfield's sheriff. Charlie Benton as Officer Richards. Christopher Allen Nelson as Officer Francis. In addition, P.J. Souls, who played Linda Vander Klock in the original 1978 film, has an off-screen voice cameo as Allison's English teacher. Production. Development. After directing the 2007 Halloween reboot, Rob Zombie was hesitant to return for Halloween 2 and announced that he would not return to direct another sequel while promoting it in an interview on MTV. Nevertheless, 2 days after its release, the Weinstein Company announced that a sequel entitled Halloween 3D would be released in the summer of 2010. Patrick Lussier and Todd Farmer were hired as the film's director and writer, and the studio planned for filming to begin in Shreveport, Louisiana in November 2009. The film was to pick up where the final frame of its 2009 predecessor left off and would pay homage to the original version of Michael Myers from the 1978 film. It would have involved Laurie Strode being committed to a psychiatric hospital after murdering Dr. Loomis and Sheriff Brackett and Michael tracking her down there 1 year later. Tyler Mane would have reprised his role as Michael Myers from the first 2 films, and Tom Atkins would have been cast as a psychiatrist, but Scout Taylor Compton did not plan on returning as Laurie Strode. After disagreements over the budget and concerns that the film was being made too quickly, Bob Weinstein delayed pre-production until after Lucy and Farmer finished their work on Drive Angry. In June 2011, development resumed with a planned release date of October 26, 2012, but was again delayed when Lucier, Farmer, and Weinstein decided to prioritize an abortive Hellraiser reboot. In 2012, Siren screenwriters Ben Collins and Luke Piotrowski pitched their take on a reboot of the series, simply entitled Halloween. By 2013, Josh Stolberg was tasked with revising a 2004 draft for Halloween Asylum, previously written by Mirror's 2 scribe Matt Veen. According to Stolberg, the script was a direct continuation of Halloween Resurrection and featured Myers breaking free from death row. In May 2014, development on Halloween 3D was revived for one final time, with Taylor Compton agreeing to appear in the film. As a result of the profitability of the Paranormal Activity franchise in the 2010s, Weinstein insisted on making Halloween 3D a found footage film, and Farmer pitched a mockumentary about a series of murders by a deranged fan taking place during the making of an in-universe film, based on Lucier and Farmer's original script. According to Farmer and Taylor Compton, none of the cast and crew involved liked the concept, and the film was ultimately scrapped. In February 2015, Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan were reported as writing a new Halloween film, described as a recalibration rather than a reboot, which Malek, Akkad, and Matt Stein were producing. On June 15, 2015, the Weinstein Company was reported to be moving ahead with another Halloween sequel, tentatively titled Halloween Returns, with Dunstan directing. It would have been a standalone film set to reintroduce audiences to Michael Myers years after his initial rampage from Halloween and 1981's Halloween 2, as he was confronted by a new generation of victims while on death row. The film would have been set in 1988 and involved Michael Myers escaping his execution from a power surge and going on a rampage in the town of Russellville, Illinois. On October 22, 2015, producer Malek Akkad revealed that the production of Halloween Returns had been postponed, citing issues with studios and different variables, and stating that the extra time would result in a better film. Akkad later revealed that he had postponed production because the studio insisted on shooting the film in Serbia, which he believed would be a poor fit for Haddonfield. In December 2015, it was announced that Dimension Films no longer had the filming rights to Halloween after Halloween Returns failed to go into production on schedule. The film's cancellation was confirmed at the same time. The rights then reverted to Miramax. On May 24, 2016, Blumhouse Productions and Miramax were announced to be co-financing a new film, with Universal Pictures distributing through the studio's output deal with Blumhouse. Blumhouse CEO Jason Blum called the original Halloween a milestone that had influenced the company to begin making horror films. The great Malek, Akkad, and John Carpenter have a special place in the hearts of all genre fans, and we are so excited that Miramax brought us together. The rights specifically went to Miramax and Tarek Akkad, who sought out Blum because of his success as a horror film producer. That same month, Mike Flanagan was being courted to direct the film with a set release date for 2017. Flanagan would ultimately pass on the offer and likened his pitch to his own film Hush. Writing and pre-production. When John Carpenter, who had co-written the first two Halloween films with Deborah Hill and directed the original, signed on as an executive producer in 2016, he described his intention: 38 years after the original Halloween, I'm going to help to try to make the 10th sequel the scariest of them all. He discussed his reasoning for revisiting the series for the first time since producing 1982's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, in an interview with Rotten Tomatoes. I talked about the Halloweens for a long time, the sequels. I haven't even seen all of them. But finally it occurred to me, well, if I'm just flapping my gums here, why don't I try to make it as good as I can? So, stop throwing rocks from the sidelines and get in there and try to do something positive. When the rights were acquired by Blumhouse, filmmaker Adam Wingard discussed making a new Halloween film, but ultimately dropped out after being sated by an email of encouragement from Carpenter, I kind of walked away from it like, I just got everything I wanted out of this job. This is about as good as it gets. On February 9th, 2017, David Gordon Green and Danny McBride were announced as handling screenwriting duties, with Green directing and Carpenter advising the project. Carpenter said that he was impressed with the pitch presented by the co-writers, solicited by Jason Blum, proclaiming that they get it. Green and McBride brought along their UNCSA colleague Jeff Fradley to co-write the script alongside them. Rather than reboot the series again, they initially chose to focus primarily on continuing the mythology of the first two films when developing the story, with Danny McBride stating, "We all came to the decision that remaking something that already works isn't a good idea, so we just have a reimagining instead." The pitch was created by the writers specifically to present to Carpenter, as they were self-described fans of the original Halloween. The story was eventually fleshed out so that all of the sequels were ignored from the new film's continuity, and the ending of the first film was retconned in what McBride likened to an alternate reality. However, he later said that the film still pays tribute to the other follow-ups, despite sharing no direct continuity. You know, like there's so many different versions, and the timeline is so mixed up. We just thought it would be easier to go back to the source and continue from there. It was nicer than knowing you're working on Halloween 11. It just seemed cooler. We're making Halloween 2. For fans, we pay homage and respect to every Halloween that has been out there. Despite Green and McBride's comedy roots, Halloween was distanced from the comedy genre. McBride further elaborated that, "I think there was like maybe one joke on the page, but the rest is straight horror." Believing that good horror movie directors are good directors, Jason Blum hired Green for his perceived amazing storytelling. No major steps were taken without Carpenter's approval, including the acceptance of the initial pitch and bringing back actress Jamie Lee Curtis. Displeased with Rob Zombie's reimagining and added backstory of murderer Michael Myers, Carpenter wanted to take the character back to his more mysterious roots, describing him as a force of nature. He's supposed to be almost supernatural. McBride detailed his approach as humanizing the character. "I think we're just trying to take it back to what was so good about the original. It was just very simple and just achieved that level of horror that wasn't turning Michael Myers into some being that couldn't be killed. I want to be scared by something that I really think could happen. I think it's much more horrifying to be scared by someone standing in the shadows while you're taking the trash out." Early on, the script for the film had Laurie's daughter, Jamie Lloyd, from the original continuities Halloween 4 and Halloween 5 appear alongside Laurie for the first time. However, subsequent rewrites changed her to Karen, 46. Even before those early plans were publicly known, Danielle Harris, who played Jamie, objected, feeling strongly about Laurie having a daughter that was not Jamie, but her appeals to the production company were dismissed. Another early draft included a reimagining of the original film's ending, where Laurie shoots the Shape off the balcony after he murders Loomis. However, Green would ultimately back down from the decision. Altogether, the writing team wrote 80 drafts of the script over the span of 8 months, with rewrites taking place up until the last week of filming. Casting in September 2017, Jamie Lee Curtis confirmed that she would reprise her role as Laurie Strode. In contrast to the character's final girl role in the original film, Laurie armed herself and prepared extensively in the time period between films in case Michael Myers returned. Although Halloween 2 and its later installments have portrayed Myers as a familicidal killer and Laurie as his sister, the writers felt that the added motive made him less frightening as a killer. As such, they intentionally ignored that aspect of the lore. In the film, Laurie's granddaughter Allison explains how her life has been impacted by Michael's homicidal rampage 40 years earlier. When a friend hints that he had heard Michael was Laurie's brother, Allison replies, "No, it was not her brother. That was something people made up." The writers did not originally know if Curtis would be willing to return, according to McBride, so they busted their ass on this script to really make that Laurie Strode character something she wouldn't be able to say no to. On why she returned, Curtis stated, "As soon as I read what David Green and Danny McBride had come up with, and the way that they connected the dots of the story, it made so much sense to me that it felt totally appropriate for me to return to Haddonfield Hill for another 40th anniversary retelling. It's the original story in many, many, many ways, just retold 40 years later with my granddaughter." Curtis had previously returned as Laurie in the sequels Halloween 2, 1981, Halloween H20, 20 years later, 1998, and Halloween Resurrection, 2002. The following October, Judy Greer entered negotiations to play Laurie's daughter, Karen Nelson. On December 7, 2017, Andi Matichak was cast to play Laurie's granddaughter, Allison. Danielle Harris, who played Jamie Lloyd in the original continuities Halloween 4 and Halloween 5, contacted Blumhouse with the offer to reprise her role in some way, but the studio went with a different daughter character. Harris and certain horror publications expressed their disappointment. "I was okay with it when she had a son, but they're saying it's the last one and she has a daughter. And it's not Jamie, it's just kind of a bummer, I guess." On December 20th, 2017, it was announced that Nick Castle, who had portrayed Michael Myers in the original film, would reprise his role, with actor and stuntman James Jude Courtney set to portray Myers as well. Courtney was suggested to Malek, Akkad, and David Gordon Green by stunt coordinator Ron Hutchinson for his ability to do both physical stunts and genuine acting, auditioning afterwards and receiving a phone call in December 2017 affirming that he had landed the role. Green explained to him his vision for Myers' mannerisms, an amalgamation of Castle's original performance and the addition of an efficient, cat-like style of movement. Courtney tailored his portrayal to those specifications from observing an actual cat. "I think cats are the most perfect hunting machines on the planet. And the beauty of it is we don't judge a cat for what a cat does." So I sort of carried that movement and the non-judgmental approach to the way I moved as the Shape, which I learned from my cat Parsifal. He referred to collaborating with Castle as an honor, while Castle described it as a passing of the torch. Courtney used John Carpenter and Castle's work on the original film to determine how the 40 years that transpired between the events of the films would inform the character over time. The December 2017 announcement of Castle's participation was widely reported as his retaking the role of Myers he originated, with Courtney only doing additional work as the character. On January 13, 2018, Virginia Gardner, Miles Robbins, Dylan Arnold, and Drew Scheid were confirmed to play Allison's friends. On January 16, 2018, Will Patton was publicized to have joined the film's roster. He was later joined by Rob Neider, both actors being announced to portray police officers, as well as British actress Rhian Rees, who was cast as a character named Dana. Speaking of the cast, Castle stated that, "What I like about this new film is they've got some really good young actors. They fleshed out the relationship of Jamie's character with her daughter and her granddaughter, and they made some choices that I think are really bold choices about who these people are and why they are the way they are now." On July 27, 2018, it was announced that a sound-alike actor would provide a voiceover for Dr. Sam Loomis, who was originally portrayed by Donald Pleasance in the original film Halloween 2, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, 1988, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, 1989, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, 1995, before his death in 1995. In the film, the voice of Dr. Loomis is heard giving advice that Michael be executed, claiming that Michael needed to be killed because there was no point in keeping evil alive. Loomis is featured in a vocal cameo when Aaron and Dana listen to a recording of Loomis made 3 months after the events of the original film. Loomis is voiced by sound-alike stand-up comedian Colin Mahan, who was used to do Donald Pleasance impressions. Mahan was hired after one of the film's executive producers heard him by chance and suggested him for the part. At Carpenter's suggestion, Green, McBride, and Fradley initially wrote some drafts where Loomis was more involved in the story, appearing on screen at the beginning of the film, with the trio devising to cast their art director Shaun White as Loomis due to his look-alike resemblance to Pleasance. But the idea went unused. Although the sequel, Halloween Kills 2021, ended up incorporating this, but with Tom Jones Jr. instead for that film's 1978 flashbacks. Additionally, P.J. Soles, who had portrayed Linda Vander Klok, Michael's final victim in the original film, was cast in a spoken cameo role as a teacher. Filming. Principal production was originally set to start in late October 2017. It got delayed until January 13, 2018 and began in Charleston, South Carolina. Michael Simmons served cinematography duties, with Paul Daly and Stuart Cantrell operating the camera. According to Danny McBride, the horror of the film aims to create a sense of tension and dread to the audience, rather than relying on graphic violence. The makeup and visual effects were provided by Christopher Nelson, 64. Jamie Lee Curtis finished her scenes on February 16, 2018, with the remaining principal photography concluding on February 19, 2018. Response to the film's first test screening led the filmmakers to schedule reshoots beginning June 11, 2018. Filming once again took place in Charleston. Courtney had a week of rehearsal before filming began. Nelson used a life cast of his face to construct the Michael Myers mask and other prosthetics worn by the actor. The mask was weathered and aged to reflect the character's authentic evolution since the original. Courtney was involved in every scene featuring Myers, including those of Nick Castle, who was only involved for a minimal amount of filming, which Castle described to the journalists on set as a cameo appearance. Jim is our Michael Myers now. Castle reprises his role in one scene with Curtis, playing as the character's reflection in a window, and did all of Michael Myers' breathing sounds in post-production. Castle expressed that it was the filmmaker's intention to maintain the atmosphere of the original, and that, like the 1978 film, it's very neighborhood-centric you-centrics. There are a lot of things coinciding in the new film that feel like clever ways to introduce a kind of deja vu of the first one without feeling like it's being copied. It was the first thing out of their mouths, really. We want to do it like John Carpenter did it. Nelson accompanied Courtney throughout filming, providing him with acting advice from his own knowledge of the characters of the Halloween films. Nelson had been interviewed and examined for the film by Akkad and Green after a conversation with Blumhouse producer Ryan Turek, who he was already acquainted with. Collaborating with fellow makeup effects artist Vincent Van Dyke, some of his designs and concepts were initially rejected due to legal complications, which were later straightened out as he began his work on the film. Rather than trying to copy the design of the original mask, he intended on recapturing what he described as the visual feeling of it. Because the film is set 40 years after the events of the original, he studied the decomposition and wrinkling of 40-year-old masks over time while outlining his take on Myers' look. You're not creating just a mask. You're creating a feeling that you get that does have an expression. But also the mask looks completely different in every single angle it's ever been photographed at. And I wanted that feeling too. Courtney was hired after Nelson advised Green not to cast a hulking stuntman in the role in compliance with the first film. Music. After previously providing the score for the original Halloween, Halloween 2, and Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, John Carpenter confirmed in October 2017 that he had made a deal to score the 2018 release. Regarding his take on the sequel, he said, "I'll be consulting with the director to see what he feels. I could create a new score, we could update the old score and amplify it, or we could combine those two things. I'll have to see the movie to see what it requires." The album was released on October 19, 2018. Release. Theatrical. Halloween had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 8, 2018, as part of its Midnight Madness section. It was theatrically released on October 19th, a week before the 40th anniversary of the original installment's release. Marketing. Universal claims to have spent an estimated $75.5 million on advertising for Halloween. The CinemaCon Film Convention premiered exclusive footage on April 25, 2018, garnering positive reactions from those in attendance. The film had a presentation at San Diego Comic-Con in Hall H on July 20th, 2018, with Jamie Lee Curtis, David Gordon Green, Malek Akkad, and Jason Blum in attendance. During the panel, which featured an extended scene and trailer, Curtis discussed how the film ties in with the Me Too movement, describing it as a film about trauma, stating, "Laurie's taking back her narrative. She has carried the trauma and PTSD of someone who was attacked of the warrant. And there comes a point where you say, I am not a victim. And this is a person who has been waiting 40 years for the chance." The first trailer for the film was released on June 8th, 2018, followed by a second trailer on September 5th, 2018. Trick or Treat Studios obtained the official costume licensing rights for the film. Both Nelson and Vincent Van Dyke joined their design team, who used toolings from the screen-used mold of Michael Myers' mask to adapt it for mass market sale. Home media. Halloween was released digitally on December 28, 2018, and was released on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, Blu-ray and DVD on January 15, 2019. Reception. Box office. Halloween grossed $159.3 million in the United States and Canada and $100.6 million in other territories for a total worldwide gross of $259.9 million. Deadline Hollywood calculated the net profit of the film to be $128.5 million when factoring together all expenses and revenues. In the United States and Canada, Halloween was projected to gross $57 to $65 million from 3,928 theaters in its opening weekend. The film made $7.7 million from Thursday night previews, the fourth highest ever for an R-rated horror film after It Chapter 2, and Paranormal Activity 3. Halloween then grossed $33.3 million on its first day, including previews, and went on to debut to $76.2 million. Marking the second best ever opening weekend of October behind Venom, the biggest debut for Blumhouse at the time, later surpassed by Five Nights at Freddy's in 2023, also made by Blumhouse, and the highest of the Halloween franchise. Its opening performance was also the best ever for a film starring a lead actress over 55 years old. With its weekend performance alone, the film became the highest grossing of the franchise. The film dropped 58% in its second weekend, but retained the top spot, grossing $32 million. After making $5.5 million on Halloween Day, a Wednesday, the film then made $10.8 million in its third weekend, falling to fifth. Worldwide, it earned around $100 million, including 12 to 30 millioners from 21 markets internationally. It ended up having a global opening weekend of $90.5 million, including $14.3 million outside the United States. The largest markets were Mexico, $5 million, Australia, $4.8 million, the United Kingdom, $3.6 million, and Russia, $1.8 million. The film made another $25.6 million from international markets in its second weekend, for a running total of $45.6 million. Critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 79% based on 385 reviews and an average rating of 6.810. The site's critical consensus reads, Halloween largely wipes the slate clean after decades of disappointing sequels, ignoring increasingly elaborate mythology in favor of basic yet still effective ingredients. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 67 out of 100. Based on 51 reviews indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale, and those at PostTrack gave it an overall 75% positive score, with 65% saying they would definitely recommend it, while the social media monitor Relish Mix noted a positive buzz response to the film online. Peter DeBrugge of Variety felt that the film brings the series back to its roots, calling it an act of fan service disguised as a horror movie. The fact it works as both means that director Green has pulled off what he set out to do, tying up the mythology that Carpenter and company established, while delivering plenty of fresh suspense and grisly creative kills for younger audiences. Writing for The Verge, Brian Bishop said the film was better than almost every other sequel in the franchise, and a fitting coda to a story that began 40 years ago, while Leah Greenblatt of Entertainment Weekly described it as a faithful fundamental sequel and funny too. In his review for Bloody Disgusting, Joe Lipsett wrote, "All in all, Halloween is a worthy entry in the franchise. Everything really clicks at the finale, which makes sense considering the film exists to pit Laurie against Michael. And in this capacity, Halloween doesn't disappoint." Jonathan Barkin of Dread Central wrote, "Halloween pays loving and respectful homage to the 1978 original while making a very bold and decisive claim for its own existence. This is quite possibly the scariest Michael Myers has ever been." In a mixed review, Eric Cohn of IndieWire criticized the film's dialogue and staging, but said, "Carpenter's own Halloween was itself a bumpy ride, made on the cheap, but carried along by the director's firm grasp on his potent themes. The new one works overtime to keep them intact while communing with the first installment in every possible way, from that famously creepy synth score to the blocky orange credits that bookend the story." RogerEbert.com's Brian Tallerico gave Halloween 2 out of 4 stars, writing it is admirable in its thematic relation to Carpenter's vision, but the no-nonsense, tightly directed aspect of the influential classic just isn't a part of this one. Carpenter's movie is so tautly refined that the sometimes incompetent slackness of this one is all the more frustrating, as is the complete lack of atmosphere, another strength of the original. Forbes. Scott Mendelson thought the film is not very good or tightly directed, and it fails as a character play and a scary movie. Christopher Stewardson from Our Culture mag wrote, "Raising some interesting questions about indifference to escalating horror, Halloween draws Michael Myers in the modern world with consideration and calculated frights." Accolade. The film was the runner-up for Grolsch People's Choice Midnight Madness Award at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2018. The film received 4 Fangoria Chainsaw Award nominations: Best Wide Release, Best Actor James Jude Courtney, Nick Castle, Best Actress Jamie Lee Curtis, and Best Makeup FX Christopher Nelson. The film also received a nomination for Best Horror Film at the Saturn Awards, with Jamie Lee Curtis winning for Best Actress. Ryan Reeves, who plays Dana Haynes, was nominated for Most Frightened Performance at the 2019 MTV Movie and TV Awards. Legacy. Sequels. Main articles: Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. A sequel to this film was released in 2021 titled Halloween Kills. Its plot focuses on Strode and her family forming a group of attentive townspeople to fend off Myers. Halloween Ends was released on October 14, 2022. Influence. Movies such as Candyman 2021, Scream 2022, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, and The Exorcist Believer 2023 are frequently cited as taking inspiration of the film's approach to rebooting a horror franchise. These films are known as requels, legacy sequels, or soft reboots. As much I hate to say this, I'm not sure that David Gordon Green, Danny McBride, and the people behind a new sequel to John Carpenter's Halloween really understand what made the first film a masterpiece. Their highly anticipated take on the legend of Michael Myers is admirable in its thematic relation to Carpenter's vision, but the no-nonsense, tightly directed aspect of the influential classic just isn't a part of this one. Carpenter's movie is so tautly refined that the sometimes incompetent slackness of this one is all the more frustrating, as is the complete lack of atmosphere, another strength of the original. In that first movie, you can hear the crunch of the leaves and smell fall in the air. This one always feels like a movie, never transporting you or offering the tactile terror of the story of The Shape. Green and McBride are playing with some interesting themes, and there's a female empowerment story of trauma here that's interesting, but underdeveloped. But do you know the biggest sin of the new Halloween? It's just not scary. And that's one thing you could never say about the original. What I like most about the new Halloween is that its message could be boiled down to something as simple as don't fuck around with evil. Don't try and study it or understand it or do a podcast about it or whatever. Just kill it. Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, learned this lesson the hard way the night she survived an attack by Michael Myers, who has been incarcerated for the 40 years since. This movie pretends all of the sequels never happened, even number 2, and even has a character make fun of the stories about Michael being Laurie's brother and things like revenge and curses in a way that comes off as snarky more than clever. Laurie has lived as her own kind of prisoner since that night, completely terrified of the day Michael would come home, basically becoming a doomsday prepper, turning her home into a heavily armed bunker. She also obsessively taught her daughter, Judy Greer, how to fend off the ultimate attacker, so much so that she's nearly estranged from her. Halloween opens with a pair of podcasters going to meet Michael and Laurie for a piece they're doing, allowing for a lot of the last paragraphs, "What have they been up to?" exposition. Michael has been completely silent for 4 decades, never saying a word, but the podcasters think it a good idea to bring him his mask on the day of the interview, meaning they and it will be nearby when Mike later escapes and beats them to death. As he makes his way back to Haddonfield on Halloween, a dozen or so victims stand in his way, including Laurie's granddaughter and some of her teenage friends, some hapless cops, and a few other locals. There's an excellently staged sequence as Michael's killing spree starts and Green's camera stays mostly outside of homes, watching the icon go about his work through windows. And yet even this moment feels almost too precious. Green makes a number of explicit references to Carpenter's film with dialogue and even shots, but there's a difference between referencing something and actually incorporating it into a new vision. The former is just an echo, and that's often what I felt watching Halloween. The echo of the original is loud, but that's ultimately hollow compared to sequels that truly build on what came before instead of just expressing how much they love it. Worst of all, Green bungles the ending. I would never spoil it, but you might imagine that an evening massacre that its central characters have been anticipating for 4 decades has to really stick the landing. At its best, Halloween is about a woman dealing with trauma for more than half her life, and only able to exorcise her demon when she faces him again. That sets up a great deal of pressure on the closing scenes, and other than one nice twist, Halloween just doesn't deliver when it needs to most of all. I walked into Halloween wanting to feel the magic of the original again in some form. Carpenter's film is one of my favorite films of all time, and David Gordon Green and Danny McBride are clearly smart guys, bringing a higher pedigree than nearly any other horror sequel, allowing for optimism. And there are, of course, elements that display Green's craftsmanship more than, say, Dwight H. Little, director of Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. I've heard a number of people say that it's the best Halloween sequel, to which one almost has to laugh at the low height of that bar. And shouldn't we expect more from a project this high profile than better than H20? Especially when the answer to that question is just barely. I know that some people have this weird affinity to the Halloween series and are very critical of anything that comes to the franchise, like the Rob Zombie remakes that I have not yet seen, which is weird as the sequels past 3 were all complete trash. I am not one of those people. I like the original and I acknowledge its importance, but it's been like most horror franchises in that there have been good Halloween films, but the majority of them aren't good. Fortunately, there's a lot to like in this one. The film is very well shot and has some amazing imagery of Michael Myers. As David Gordon Green's first straight-up horror film, I was pretty impressed. Reflections of his mask in the window, the way his various knives glisten, it was all very impressive. A particularly impressive shot of Myers walking down a street during Halloween night forces us to follow him in and out of houses while murdering people. Carpenter updated the score for this picture, and I really like that as well. Jamie Lee Curtis reprises her role as Laurie Strode, along with 2 other generations of Strode women. I like the trickle-down of trauma present within the family because of the events of the original, What happened 40 years ago still haunts the elder Strode, and that has helped shape their family for many years. Unfortunately, the script isn't one of the film's strong suits, and we get a pile of unnecessary teen drama with Allison, the youngest Strode, and her friends. All of Allison's friends turn out to be scumbags, which seems a little cheap, considering Michael Myers doesn't need reasons to kill people, and we as the audience won't think that someone deserves to die because they tried to kiss their best friend's girlfriend anyway. I don't think that the end of the film gives Laurie Strode the epic showdown that it teases, which is a bit disappointing, and the final battle doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm fully expecting some backlash with this next comment, but here goes. I don't think Michael Myers is a very interesting antagonist, and there's really nothing that makes him stand out amongst his slow-moving, seemingly invincible dummy peers in the slasher genre. I would have liked to see his character evolve over 40 years in the nut house. Hear me out. In the first Halloween, a 21-year-old Michael Myers gets out and methodically kills people. He lumbers around until finally he's bested. 40 years later, he does the exact same thing. What if over the course of 4 decades he learned out to duck or even run? Imagine how cool it would have been to see an agile, fast Michael Myers subverting all expectations all of a sudden. As it is, we get the same slow-moving oaf. I also still don't understand why Myers appears to be invincible. Gunshots don't seem to faze him, and as far as I know, he's still just a regular flesh-and-blood person. This is where having a quick Myers would have gone a long way. The kills we see are brutal, but they're also a mite boring in comparison to other slashers. Myers is a brute with very little variation to his kills aside from stomping, stabbing, and bashing until his victim is dead. It's believable. Of course, I say that within the confines of the Haddonfield world, but not flashy. Not necessarily a detractor from the film, more of an observation. He also kills a couple of podcasters, so I feel personally attacked. Kidding, they barked up a stupid tree. In his brilliant turn-of-the-century documentary, The American Nightmare, Adam Simon located John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween as the endpoint of a decade of countercultural horror movies. Starting with George Romero's 1968 Night of the Living Dead, Simon unpicked the rebellious socio-political threads of films such as Last House on the Left, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Shivers before arriving at the more conservative inflections of Carpenter's ruthlessly efficient modern morality tale. A stylishly suspenseful thriller in which teenagers indulging in illicit sex and intoxication are stalked and slashed by a relentless killer, Halloween was a funhouse ride with a puritanical narrative edge. I didn't mean to put an end to the sexual revolution, Carpenter laughingly told Simon, and for that I deeply apologize. Yet it also had a punky power that inspired a slew of titillating teen terror slashers. Friday the 13th may have lifted its gory riffs from Mario Bava's A Bay of Blood, just as Carpenter looked back to Bob Clark's Black Christmas, but it was Halloween that paved the way for its blockbuster success. A string of inferior sequels and reboots followed Carpenter's low-budget hit, from Rick Rosenthal's 1981 Halloween 2, written by original screenwriters Carpenter and Deborah Hill, to Rob Zombie's dreary 2007 reimagining, and its dispiriting follow-up. Now David Gordon Green, whose career has swerved from Terrence Malick-esque indie hit George Washington to the stoner comedy of Pineapple Express and Your Highness, retreads familiar ground with added PTSD. Like the 20th anniversary outing Halloween H20, which effectively overrode installments 4 to 6, the superior Halloween 3 Season of the Witch follows an entirely separate narrative. This latest incarnation effectively dumps the sequels and simply picks up 40 years after the events of the first film, with surprisingly sprightly results. Former knife-wielding maniac Michael Myers, James Jude Courtney, with contributions from the original's masked madman Nick Castle, is now in a mental institution, serving his incarceration in silence. Meanwhile, survivor and final girl archetype Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, terrific, is living in a remote home-cum security compound. Haunted by the murderous specter of Myers, a.k.a. The Shape, Laurie's paranoia has taken its toll. She's seen her marriages collapse, become estranged from her daughter, Karen, a sharply cast Judy Greer, who was taken away as a child and now fears for the safety of her teenage granddaughter, Allison, Andi Matichak. As Laurie tells the annoying podcasters who show up looking for a story, I'm a basket case. When Michael escapes during transfer to a maximum security prison, a nod to Halloween 4, Laurie is hardly surprised. "He's waited for me," she says. "I've waited for him." Sharing writing credits with Danny McBride and Jeff Fradley, Green delivers a slickly packaged modern slasher that balances wry humor and knowing genre callbacks with moments of 18-rated gore and some efficiently executed showdowns. There are plenty of homages to the first film, from the signature floating shots that follow Michael's killing spree to Carpenter's insistent 5/4 semitonal score, revisited here by the maestro in collaboration with his son, Cody Carpenter, and godson Daniel Davies. But while the Shape's iconic visage, originally a William Shatner Captain Kirk mask, may have been elegantly aged and decomposed, the pure evil of Michael's quasi-supernatural quest retains a quaintly unreconstructed retro feel. What has changed is Curtis's avenging angel, pitched somewhere between the reborn strength of a Terminator 2-era Sarah Connor, vests and shotguns to the fore, and the obsessive madness of Donald Pleasance's now-deceased psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis. While Halleck Bilginer's Dr. Sartain may be sarcastically dismissed by Laurie as the new Loomis, it's Strode herself who actually wears that mantle. And in the absence of Pleasance, she wears it well. If the way I raised your mother means that she hates me, but she's prepared for the horrors of this world, Laurie tells her granddaughter ominously, I can live with that. Fans will enjoy the smart inversion of key scenes from the original, with cinematographer Michael Simmons repeatedly framing Laurie and Michael as interchangeable mirror images, hunter and hunted, intertwined. Whether or not the new Halloween is actually scary is a matter for debate. There's nothing here as shocking as the opening act of Hereditary or as original as Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which brilliantly resurrected the long moribund specter of Freddy Krueger in 1994. Yet after 4 decades of diminishing returns, the fact that a guy in a mask can still take an entertaining stab at a somewhat jaded audience is oddly reassuring. Halloween 2018, directed by David Gordon Green, is the true sequel to John Carpenter's 1978 horror classic of the same name. And while there is no disputing the huge impact Carpenter's original Halloween has had on the horror genre and pop culture as a whole, I'm honestly not the biggest fan of the film, finding its pace far too slow and the film's climax rather anticlimactic. That's why I am extremely surprised, yet pleased to say, that not only is David Gordon Green's Halloween one of the best films of the year, but it tops the original in my humble opinion. Green's Halloween is set 40 years after the original movie, retconning any installments that followed. This genius move allowed Green and his producers to tell their own story and create their own continuity, an idea I've been an advocate for since it worked so wonderfully for Logan last year. Plenty of eyebrows were raised when it was announced that Green would be directing and co-writing alongside longtime collaborator Danny McBride, Pineapple Express, and Eastbound and Down. It was completely understandable for people to be skeptical due to both men being predominantly known for their comedic work. However, both men have proved all doubters wrong, creating a fantastic slasher film that is a beautiful love letter to the original Halloween while still being original enough to stand on its own 2 feet. After Halloween, A Quiet Place, and especially Get Out, I think all horror films should be directed by people who originate from a comedic background. Our entry point into 2018's Halloween is from the perspective of 2 British true crime podcasters portrayed by Ryan Rees and Jefferson Hall. Green uses these characters in such a genius way, allowing them to recap the events of the original film, but also signifying to the audience what landscape of this film's world is like now. Michael Myers has been locked up in captivity for 40 years under the supervision of Dr. Sartain, Halleck Bilginer. And the lone survivor of Michael's attack, Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, has spent her life suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, living in constant fear ever since the events of October 31st, 1978. I know it's highly unlikely and somewhat of a controversial opinion, but I honestly believe Jamie Lee Curtis deserves a Best Actress nomination for her tremendous performance in this film. Curtis is the glue that holds this film together. If she doesn't work, the film doesn't work. Curtis, who reprises her role from the original, portrays Laurie Strode, whom has spent entire life since that night 40 years ago preparing for eventual and somewhat inevitable return of Michael Myers, and because of this obsession, it has strongly affected her relationships with her daughter and granddaughter. Laurie's PTSD and her relationship or lack of with her family is one of the strongest elements of the film. The ever-solid Judy Greer portrays Laurie's daughter, who spent her entire childhood being trained by her mother to prepare for Michael's return before being taken away by social services. This sets up a genuinely appealing dynamic between the two, where the audience understands where each character is coming from. The dynamic is only heightened by the sensational chemistry Curtis and Greer have with each other, making any scene featuring the two one of the highlights of the film. However, easily the highlight of the film is the Shape himself, Michael Myers. Despite being around for 40 years, featuring in a plethora of sequels and reboots, this is easily the scariest Michael Myers has ever been. This film does such an excellent job of building upon the mythology of the Shape, yet still leaving us with more questions than answers, often making the audience wonder whether Michael is human, something more, or maybe he just is the living embodiment of pure evil. Michael's kills are another highlight of the film. The body count of this film is extremely high, essentially tripling the original. The kills are extremely well choreographed, heightening the brutality of each one and making each death feel impactful and important, and at no point did any kill feel unnecessary. There is a beautifully choreographed tracking shot that takes on Michael's return to Haddonfield, which is a contender for Scene of the Year. The tracking shot scene epitomes everything that is great about 2018's Halloween. The scene is one of the best slasher scenes I've ever seen. However, that brings me to my first negative about the film. Halloween does an extraordinary job at being a slasher film. However, it doesn't do a very good job at being a horror film. At no point was the film genuinely scary or creepy, and the film often relied on an overabundance of cheap jump scares. However, this was the same problem people had with It, but that didn't stop the film from being great overall. The jump scares is only a minor problem, but the biggest problem with the Halloween is simply just one scene that I cannot discuss for spoiler reasons, but you will know it when you see it. The scene felt extremely out of place and was only simply done to take the plot from point A to point B. Thankfully, this scene didn't have a long-lasting impact on the film and didn't take away from the extraordinary 40-minute climax that followed. There are a few minor problems with Halloween, but they do not detract from the great film Miramax Blumhouse have produced. The film was clearly made by people who had a love and a passion for the original film. The film's score is nothing short of sensational, predominantly using Carpenter's iconic scores. The film is also littered with Easter eggs and callbacks for hardcore fans to spot, with one scene involving a balcony easily being the highlight. Overall, Halloween's direction, cast, story, script, cinematography, and score all come together to create a fantastic sequel with a heart of its own. 2018's Halloween is a must-watch for fans of the franchise, and I would even the film for people who aren't, like myself. Halloween may have a few minor problems, but they don't hold it back from being undoubtedly one of 2018's best films. It's been 4 decades since Michael Myers and his fright mask first gave us the willies in John Carpenter's Halloween, which makes him 61. And if David Gordon Green's same-named sequel is to be believed, still in possession of a ramrod spine, piledriver fists, and non-arthritic knees. The meals at Smith's Grove Sanitarium, where he's been cooling his heels all these years, must be unusually nutritious. On the other hand, Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, the feisty Illinois babysitter who once eluded Michael's stalk-and-slash spree, has aged more credibly than her nut-job nemesis. Now a grandmother and self-described basket case, Laurie has weathered 2 failed marriages and estrangement from her daughter, Karen, Judy Greer, who's scarred by a childhood steeped in doomsday preparation. Eyes burning beneath a fluff of gray hair, Laurie lives in a fortress-like home with a hidey hole in the kitchen and gun cases in place of art, convinced that Michael will one day return for her. She may be paranoid, but she's no fool. When 2 true crime-seeking English podcasters show up at her steel gates, she says little to help them and sends them packing. And return Michael does, played by James Jude Courtney, with a cameo by the originating actor Nick Castle, escaping from a prison transfer van on Halloween night and lumbering back to finish the job. At this point, Green, who wrote the script with Jeff Fradley and Andi McBride, makes a crucial decision. Brushing aside the mostly wan intervening attempts to resurrect Carpenter's minimalist masterpiece, he has made a straight-up sequel, a rematch between heroine and villain. This isn't a wisecracking tongue-in-cheek picture. Green wants us to believe in his bogeyman, and Curtis is his ace card. Leaving no room for winks or giggles, she makes Laurie's long, festering terror the glue that holds the movie together. And we need her, because otherwise the filmmakers have little but a conventional slasher movie sprinkled with memory triggers and callbacks to its source. The familiar voice of Donald Pleasance, actually a sound-alike, as Michael's former psychiatrist, is heard on an audio tape, and iconic images, a slatted closet door, a hulking street lamp-lit figure, press our pleasure buttons, as does the familiar musical theme, goosing the action as fresh babysitters and randy boyfriends are imperiled, including Laurie's granddaughter, Andi Matichak. But the body count is respectable, if unremarkable by today's standards. The original Halloween was never about volume. Perhaps pandering to viewers who these days expect a higher yuck factor, this new iteration is more gruesome, yet much less scary. Its sleekness and efficiency poor substitutes for foreboding. Sorely missing are Carpenter's moderation and patience, the restraint that turns simple shots of a darkened stairway and a hushed, leaf-lined street into dread-filled spaces. His Michael was both man and myth, particular and universal. Psychopath and supernatural entity. There's a reason he also appears in the credits as the Shape. By sending Michael forth to perform his greatest hits, like backseat lurking and unexpectedly sitting up, Green reduces a character who was the ultimate mystery to an audience-prompting device that feels as worn as his perfectly aged mask. Though I suppose when you're a mere knife blade away from collecting Social Security, no one can blame you for looking a wee bit tired. From its first moments, David Gordon Green's new Halloween seems designed to reassure. From opening credits that recall those of John Carpenter's 1978 original, and which roll out over a slightly updated version of Carpenter's familiar theme music, to clever callbacks and echoed shots, Green's film is designed as a companion piece to Carpenter's as much as a sequel. As such, it works quite well. Jamie Lee Curtis returns as Laurie Strode, the one who got away from masked killer Michael Myers 40 years ago, and the film's greatest innovation is to ponder what kind of effect surviving such an incident might have on someone, an intriguing element it never explores that deeply. That kind of sidetrack would mean not playing it safe, which isn't on Green's agenda. Which is fine. Co-written by Jeff Fradley and Green's frequent collaborator Danny McBride, Halloween is the film many fans have been waiting for, one that pits Laurie against Michael in a rematch, which Halloween H20 already did in 1998, but who remembers or cares, and brings the series back to its basics by throwing out all the sequels and their accumulated mythology. No more odd ties to Celtic curses. The film has a clever opening involving a pair of obnoxious true crime podcasters, a middle sequence in which Michael goes on a door-to-door killing spree that plays like the best 80s Halloween sequel never made, and, without spoiling too much, a battle royale finale that makes Laurie seem like a formidable threat to her longtime foe. It's fun and impeccably crafted by a highly skilled director who clearly loves the material. And it offers virtually nothing to chew over on the ride home, which is fine. Co-written by Jeff Fradley and Green's frequent collaborator Danny McBride, Halloween is the film many fans have been waiting for, one that pits Laurie against Michael in a rematch, which Halloween H20 already did in 1998, but who remembers or cares, and brings the series back to its basics by throwing out all the sequels and their accumulated mythology. No more odd ties to Celtic curses. The film has a clever opening involving a pair of obnoxious true crime podcasters, a middle sequence in which Michael goes on a door-to-door killing spree that plays like the best 80s Halloween sequel never made, and without spoiling too much, a battle royale finale that makes Laurie seem like a formidable threat to her longtime foe. It's fun and impeccably crafted by a highly skilled director who clearly loves the material, and it offers virtually nothing to chew over on the ride home. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. Dr. Samuel Loomis, played with plummy flourishes by Donald Pleasance, says of the boy he spent years trying to understand in the 1978 film. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. That's a pretty thin medical analysis, but one keeping with Carpenter's chief inspiration, a college visit to a psychiatric institution in which he spotted a dead-eyed kid. It also keeps with a 70s understanding of mental illness and violence. As critic Amy Nicholson notes in her excellent podcast Halloween Unmasked, the term serial killer wasn't common in 1978, much less an understanding of the pathology and predictive behaviors of those driven to kill and kill again. It was easier to think of such murderers as impossible to understand monsters, and maybe a little more comfortable too. That had shifted dramatically by 2007, and Zombies film reflects that shift. Where Carpenter's opens with a famous, relatively brisk first-person Steadicam sequence in which we see a 6-year-old Michael killing his sister, Zombies' version dwells on Michael's childhood. We see him ridiculed by his mother's abusive boyfriend, William Forsythe, and bullied at school. We learn he's acting out by killing animals. His only real connection is with his frequently absent mother, Sherry Moon Zombie. When he takes his first human life, it's because he's pushed too far. Then he just keeps going. The film doesn't rush past this. In fact, it dwells on it. Michael's childhood takes up over a quarter of the film in Zombies' director's cut, and the effect is to make him more pitiable than scary, at least for a while. He's a boy who needs help, and when it arrives in the form of Loomis, Malcolm McDowell, matching Pleasance's theatricality note for note, it seems at best inadequate, and at worst counterproductive. In Carpenter's film, Michael doesn't speak a word after killing his sister. In Zombies' version, Michael talks and talks until he starts to shut down, withdrawing from a world he increasingly doesn't understand. Loomis seems ill-equipped to bring him back from the abyss. Eventually, this being a Halloween remake, he has to get down to the business of breaking out and returning to his hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois, to get on with the murdering, and to seek out Laurie, the sister he couldn't kill, a detail that Zombie kept from the Carpenter-scripted 1981 sequel Halloween 2, but wasn't actually in the original film. Yet even here, Zombie doesn't stick to the script. Played by wrestler-turned-actor Tyler Mane, Michael is a looming, terrifying, single-minded figure in the slasher tradition, but Zombie stages his kills to linger a beat or two too long. The violence is drawn out and bloody, but it feels less sadistic than provocative. Zombies' Halloween isn't funny games, but it asks some of the same questions. Why are you watching this? Is this really what you want to see? Spending so much time with the broken little boy who became the monster gives it an extra sense of unease. Zombies' Halloween is a tragedy that unfolds on two fronts: the killings themselves and the neglect and mistreatment that made the killer. His 2009 follow-up, Halloween 2, can't quite sustain that unease, unfortunately. It never asks us to sympathize with Michael, but it does ask us to understand him. Back in 2015, I reviewed each and every of the original 8 Halloween movies for the site. I watched them in order. I turned a critical eye to a franchise that I have loved for so long, and I weighed their relative merits. Despite my wildest dreams, Never in a million years did I expect to see the day that I would get the chance to watch a new Michael Myers film in theaters, let alone to sit down to write a review for a new installment in the iconic franchise. Since John Carpenter's original Halloween movie was released in 1978, there have been a great deal of imitators, both within the franchise and without. The story has grown more complicated with each new Halloween film. Sinuous branches grew up to form a family tree. A man in black came into town and brought ancient runes and magic with him. Laurie died and came back to life and died again. In David Gordon Green's addition to the story, the slate is wiped clean and we go back to basics. There is no mention of the cult of Thorn, and the idea that Laurie and Michael are brother and sister is casually cast off as something that people made up to make them feel better. Laurie is back and stronger than when we saw her in H20. She's no longer treating her PTSD with substance abuse or suffering from crippling nightmares. She isn't living in witness protection or hiding from what happened. It's been 40 years since her friends were brutally murdered and she was stalked by Michael Myers. And in the interim, she has been preparing for a reunion. When Michael escapes from the hospital transport, like he is wont to do, Laurie is ready. Reviewing this movie critically is hard to do if you have even a passing admiration for the original source material. If you had asked me the moment that I walked out of the theater what I thought, I would have told you that I was disappointed. Separating the nostalgia for the original and the feelings that those movies create is hard to do. The reality is that nothing could have prevented that feeling after all of the excitement. But the further I get from the movie, and the feeling of seeing it, the more my estimation of it changes. The film isn't perfect, but then again, no version of this story will ever recapture that magic. The editing choices make the film feel strangely segmented. I was waiting for them to put in title cards announcing each chapter, and the placement of each of these gaps pulled me out of the movie somewhat, but they may not stand out as much to everyone. There is also a scene that revolves around a guy feeling like he's in the friend zone, that feels retrograde and out of place in a movie coming out in 2018. But all of that being said, this movie is one that is clearly made with an immense amount of love for the source material, and that love is evident in just about every aspect of the movie. The film is full of Easter eggs, not just to the original, but to several of the sequels as well, and it is clear from the interviews with cast and crew before the film's release that everyone involved was excited to be a part of the movie. The film's score rides the line perfectly between replicating John Carpenter's work while doing its own thing, and it is incredibly effective. And there is a role reversal between Laurie and Michael as the movie goes on that is really powerfully done. All in all, how you feel about this movie will likely have as much to do with your connection to the previous films, your theater-going experience, and your nostalgia just as much, if not more, than with this film itself. What I can say is that this movie gave me the chance to sit in a theater full of nerds, many of them dressed as Michael, and watch a new Halloween movie, and it was a damn blast! In the title sequence of director David Gordon Green's Halloween, a pseudo-relaunch and sequel of the iconic horror franchise, we watch as a rotted pumpkin rematerializes, as though replaying time-lapse photography in reverse. A goopy, molded, and collapsed orange mass balloons into a freshly carved jack-o'-lantern, resembling the one that appeared next to the opening credits of John Carpenter's original Halloween in 1978. The new sequence can easily be seen as a metaphor for the movie's ambitions to revive the franchise, which has changed ownership and authorship over the years, resulting in several downright awful sequels and a failed attempt to restart the series by Rob Zombie. The new iteration, produced by Blumhouse, Jason Blum's House of Horror, responsible for recent franchises such as Insidious, Paranormal Activity, and The Purge, seeks to win the hearts of devoted fans by closely aligning itself with Carpenter's original, as indicated by the symbolism of the opening titles. Jamie Lee Curtis returns to her career-launching role as Laurie Strode. Michael Myers even looks more like he did in 1978 when he was called The Shape, the name given to the character in Carpenter and Deborah Hill's script, denoting his status as a boogeyman, an embodiment of unknowable evil. Whereas in sequels, he never looked quite right. Along with a half-dozen visual nods to the original, Green's movie is a labor of referential affection. Retconning the mythology of Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, and the babysitter murders of Haddonfield, Illinois, Green's script, co-written by his longtime collaborator Danny McBride, inserts itself between the original and everything that came afterward. This curious strategy seeks to delete unwanted or inconvenient story elements from the minds of viewers, similar to how Superman Returns, 2006, pretended that neither Superman 3 or Superman 4, Quest for Peace, happened. But the deletions made by Green and McBride are more significant. Their meta-concept attempts to resituate the Michael Myers mythology to just after Carpenter's first movie, before Halloween 2, 1981, which established that Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode was actually Michael's sister, thus reducing his actions to an extended attempt to repeat the sororicide that he committed as a young boy. However, in the new Halloween, Green and McBride cannot overcome the cultural osmosis that has implanted the notion of Michael Myers and Laurie Strode as siblings. It's as ingrained as Freddy Krueger being the son of 100 maniacs, or Jason Voorhees drowning in Crystal Lake. In their attempt to right around the escalating nonsensicality of the familial connections that emerged over 7 direct sequels to Carpenter's classic, they put the viewer into a muddled headspace, leaving it difficult to resituate everything we already know about the franchise. The movie opens with 2 investigative journalists, Jefferson Hall, Rian Rees, researching the Haddonfield murders of 1978 for their podcast. They're essentially a continuity-establishing device, and through their expositional dialogue, they introduce Green and McBride's new conception of the mythology between Michael and Laurie, the 2 primal forces at the center of the movie. They visit the hospital where Michael has been for 40 years following his capture that Halloween night in '78, and they attempt to goad him out of his decades-long catatonia to no avail. It's their last chance before the hospital transfers Michael to a more prison-like facility, warns his doctor, Dr. Ranbir Sartain, Haluk Bilginer. "You're the new Loomis," it's winkingly remarked later. Then the podcasters visit Laurie Strode, who has spent the last 4 decades writhing in paranoia and militant preparedness. Riddled with a history of mental problems and substance abuse, she lives on a secluded woodland compound loaded with booby traps, a gun range, and firearms galore. Curtis is clearly enjoying the new take on her first role, as her character is a basket case whose lifelong terror is not unjustified. Twice divorced, Laurie also has a now-grown daughter, Karen, Judy Greer, who resents the way her mother raised her in an environment of weapons and extreme self-defense. Karen tries to live a normal life with her good-humored husband, Ray, Toby Huss, and their teenage daughter, Allison, Andi Matichak. Estranged from her grandmother, Allison tries to rekindle a relationship with crazy Grandma Laurie. Inevitably, the bus that was to transfer Michael to another hospital crashes on October 30th, no less, setting the killer free to journey back to Haddonfield. As the bodies begin to pile up, Sheriff Hawkins, Will Patton, searches for Michael alongside Dr. Sartain, while Laurie frantically drives around town in her pickup truck on Halloween night, determined to kill the presence that has infested her life and mind, despite Michael being locked up for 40 years. This detail is significant, as other characters tell her to get over it throughout the movie before Michael's arrival. After all, if the relationship between Michael and Laurie was limited to their limited interactions in 1978, as the new mythology suggests, it's rather strange that Laurie has defined her life by this brief encounter. Why does she assume he will return, for instance, if she hasn't spent the last 4 decades putting up with their many exchanges in the sequels? Unfortunately, the script doesn't elaborate much on Laurie's state beyond some vague allusions. Meanwhile, almost with a sense of responsibility toward the slasher genre and its long-held tradition of dead teenagers, the movie diverts to Allison and her group of friends. The couple Vicky, Virginia Gardner, and Dave, Miles Robbins, are introduced if only to be disposed of, but at least the little boy they're babysitting, Jibrail Nantambu, has a few show-stealing funny lines, no doubt written by McBride in this uncharacteristically comical script. Elsewhere, even though several scenes establish Allison's new boyfriend, Cameron Dylan Arnold, the character mysteriously disappears from the movie after it's discovered at their school's Halloween dance that he's unfaithful. A later reference to the dance being broken up because of Michael's return to the frightened neighborhood suggests that perhaps a sequence in which Michael appropriately disposes of the cheating boyfriend was deleted. In any case, after gleefully showcasing a few teen deaths, the movie concentrates on Laurie, who, after confirming Michael's return, brings her reluctant family to her compound, a fortress designed to trap intruders of the knife-wielding, mask-wearing variety. Green makes only slight attempts to replicate the look and feel of Carpenter's original. This includes the movie's basic color palette and a few early scenes that show Michael out of focus in the background as someone in the foreground looks around, oblivious. The production recreates a convincing autumnal suburban landscape reminiscent of the original, with leaf-strewn sidewalks and overcast skies, while cinematographer Michael Simmons uses a predominance of orange earth tones that signal the titular holiday. The score is quite good, with Carpenter, his son Cody Carpenter, and Daniel Davies providing an electronic reimagining of the original's memorable relentless notes. In recent years, the three musicians have contributed to Carpenter's Lost Themes albums and toured together as a band. But rather than replicate Dean Cundy's brilliant use of master shots and the wide rectangular frame from the original, Simmons and Green employ disorienting close-ups of Michael's tattered and filthy Halloween mask that reflects his age. He's now in his 60s, as evidenced in off-kilter angles that barely glimpse the character's thinning hair, leathered skin, and graying beard from behind. Green's approach is also far gorier than Carpenter's almost bloodless version. Michael strangles a child. He smashes the face of a gas station attendant to collect the teeth, which he uses to taunt another victim. He stabs several victims with his signature kitchen knife, and he stomps on a victim's head, crushing it like a spoiled pumpkin beneath his foot. Though one wonders how Michael retains such superhuman strength, given that, according to Dr. Sartain, he's been physically inert for the duration of his 40-year stay in the mental hospital, and thus should have experienced some muscle atrophy. But perhaps this critical calculus of form isn't fair to Green, who has made a visually compelling movie in spite of the countless differences to what came before. Several of Green's sequences prove frightening, such as a scary bit involving a lawn motion sensor or a tense few minutes that follow Laurie through her house armed with a shotgun, methodically checking each room for Michael. To be sure, a persistent hunter becomes the hunted theme emerges throughout the new Halloween, and Green finds not-so-subtle ways to suggest this role reversal. Take how Michael hides in a closet, just as Laurie hid in a closet in the original. Or take the scene when Michael and Laurie engage in a violent struggle on the second story of her home, and he throws her out of the window. She lands on the lawn below, identical to how Michael ended up in Carpenter's Halloween. And as you might predict, when Michael peeks over the balcony to see if she's still there, her cartoony imprint that remains on the grass is revealed with the same sharp stinger on the soundtrack to indicate the terror of her absence. Indeed, Green's Halloween is filled with throwaway references to the earlier entries like this, such as the presence of sliced ham from Halloween 2 or the silver shamrock mask from Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, 1982. But they do little to enhance the story. Although the new movie creates a renewed sense of dread over the long, unintimidating masked killer Michael Myers through its series of decidedly grisly murders, the sheer brutality of which is shocking, the material's bizarrely retconned conceptualization, absurd twists, and overall fan fiction quality are self-consciously clever, distractingly so. Those unfamiliar with the previous movies will have an easier time settling into the experience, whereas the movie caters itself to devoted fans, who ironically will undoubtedly take issue with many of the creative choices throughout. The movie functions well on a visceral level and in terms of craft, but situating its place in the Halloween continuity, or even our appreciation for the franchise's legacy, remains more complex than a slasher remake or sequel should be. Nevertheless, Blumhouse's new version is bound to spawn sequels of its own given the ambiguity of its finale, deploying another series of tired scenarios and comebacks for a new generation. The sad reality is, Green's movie remains one of the best sequels in the franchise, which, given its mediocrity, isn't saying much for everything that came after Carpenter's original classic film. However, are unparalleled in the franchise, make of it what you will. But those people complaining about the size of Michael's knife in the trailers will get their fair share of gore, as Michael literally gets his bare hands dirty. Quite sometimes the score is tremendous, and powerful John and Cody Carpenters seriously outdid themselves. It's true to the classic score, but less subdued, more impactful, just that one bit more evil. Yes, it's slightly reminiscent of Alan Howard's contentious electric guitar rendition of the original, but changes and variations to the theme are more subtle, more appropriate, more rhythmic, combining new motifs with classic ones. Lore's theme is still going strong here, as is the shape stocks. It truly sent shivers down my spine on many occasions throughout the movie. Goosebumps, guaranteed watch for that. Scene of Michael putting the mask on for the first time, and the Elrod incident. Sheer horror for eyes and ears in a good way, naturally. Oh, and whilst we're at it, another aspect that will make all of the hardcore nerds rejoice: the film is packed with homages to its predecessors, referencing H123 and H20 in the most respectful way while ignoring them all. At the same time, from more obvious references such as the old DePoost pumpkin skull and witch masks from H3s, evil silver shamrock during trick-or-treating scenes, to less subtle references of the aforementioned Elrod incident and an H20-like rest stop scene. Absolutely love that one. Ultimate nerd. Reference: remember the poster in Lore's bedroom showing a self-portrait of Belgian painter James Ensor? She still owns it. 40 years on cinematography. Was beautiful. Without a doubt, the most aesthetic Halloween of them all. The old, cold and warm contrasty color scheme representing threat and safe spaces respectively, paired with beautiful picture compositions, just raise this film to the next level. I don't want to sound like an absolute Halloween nerd. Granted, I am one. But this is, in my opinion, the best of the franchise, right after John Carpenter's original masterpiece. And let me tell you, during the course of the making, during the release of stills and trailers, I've been this film's biggest skeptic. Thank you, David Gordon Green, Danny McBride, John Carpenter, and Jam Lee Curtis for making this one rainy October night in the front row of Hamburg's Klex so special. For me and a couple of other horror nerds, and for bringing class back to the franchise right from the beginning. 'Cause even the opening credits are epic. Wait for it, extra information. In 1978, John Carpenter took a low-rent concept and turned it into a horror masterpiece. Lean, mean, and efficient, Carpenter's Halloween unleashed a force of quiet, unstoppable, evil Michael Myers, remorseless murderer, more living nightmare than man Halloween. Launched a franchise, and while many of the sequels had their moments, none could ever live up to the ghoulish heights of Carpenter's original. Now 40 years since the world first met Michael Myers, director David Gordon Green resurrects the character and attempts to bring some form of closure and dignity to the series while ignoring every single sequel that came before it. The bad news: Green's Halloween never comes even slightly close to capturing the magic of Carpenter's film. Gone is the chilling efficiency and the dread-soaked atmosphere. Green, working from a script he co-wrote with Danny McBride and Jeff Fradley, instead attempts to go for broke, loading his Halloween with enough tricks and treats to satiate hungry horror fans. While the 2018 film has none of the stripped-down brilliance of the 1978 Halloween, it succeeds at giving Jim Lee Curtis Laurie Stroherd while making Michael Myers scary again. This is Curtis film through and through. And the actress easily slips back into one of her most iconic roles. The Laurie in the original Halloween was a terrified teenager, ill, prepared to confront such immitigable evil. The Laurie here is a survivor and a fighter. She spent the last 40 years certain that Michael Myers would come back to finish her off, and as a result, devoted her life to becoming the ultimate badass with a house rigged up with booby traps and an arsenal that would make the Punisher blush. Laurie is determined not to be a victim again. Curtis excels at handling Laura's tough but somewhat damaged state. She can take care of herself and then some, but she still bears the scars, emotional and physical, of that long-ago Halloween night. Unfortunately, her survive instincts have cost her dearly. She's burned through several marriages and alienated her daughter, Judy Greer, the only member of Laura's family sympathetic to her, his granddaughter Allison, Andi Matichak, too. Everyone else, Laurie is a cook, of course. Laurie is about to have the last bitter laugh because, sure enough, Michael Myers, Nick Castle, breaks out of an insane asylum and cuts a bloody path back to Haddonfield. Here is where Halloween is most successful. The franchise as a whole slowly turned Michael Myers into a generic, predictable slasher, someone merely on hand to quickly dispatch horny teens and little else. This Halloween effectively reminds us of how uniquely terrifying he can be, an absolute monster, a walking battering ram, smashing his way through everyone and everything in his sight. He has no sympathy, no empathy, no humanity. He is an unstoppable killing machine, and it's unnerving and terrifying to watch. The Laurie and Michael segments of Halloween are worth celebrating. Unfortunately, nearly everything else around them is not. A tack-on storyline involving Allison and her high school friends is rushed and clumsy and merely there to give Michael more victims to decimate, and a plot line involving Michael's new doctor, Huck Biller, borders on laughable. Thankfully, Green Stage is a breathtaking, exciting, and invigorating conclusion, making great use of shadows and relying heavily on subverting expectations. The long-awaited showdown between Michael and Laurie is worth the wait. Green cleverly finds ways to reference shots from Carpenter's original, only with the roles reversed, bringing things full circle. Laurie Strode is no longer the prey. The hunted is now the hunter. Audiences longing for a Halloween to rival the original are going to be sorely disappointed, but there's enough raw power here to hold viewers rapt, perhaps realizing emulating Carpenter's would be a fool's errand. Green instead opts for cheaper thrills still after 40 years and some questionable sequels. It's a blast to see Michael Myers back home where he belongs. Halloween was so good because the formula above was applied with Myrie. The director John Carpenter knew exactly what to show and what to not show to let the audience tense during 1H and 31 minutes of exhibition. Carpenter's story was effective for its level of creepiness and simplicity. After 15 years locked down in a sanatorium for killing his older sister in a Halloween night, Michael Myers escapes from the institution and returns to his hometown for more madness. When he is back, one of his encounters with a babysitter, Laurie Strode, portrayed by Jim Lee Curtis, triggers his stalker mode, making him chase her and her friends during the night. Michael and Laurie were not brother and sister in this original script. My favorite parts are definitely Halloween 2, 1981, and the infamous H20, 1998, while the first mentioned is a perfect sequel where a reasonable storyline is tempered with an addition of good gore and classic elements that made people love the original. The second reflects the cinematography post-Scream, 1996, and mixes the late 9 slasher movie success recipe with the darkness of Carpenter's tale, so I expect a Halloween F film to be dark, surprising, and scary. Halloween 2018 is a love letter to the original. The director, David Gordon Green, was smart enough to abandon every installment that came after the 1978 flick and create a real sequel that would look clean and continue John Carpenter's story. It's well directed. It is well written. It has great acting, and the pacing is overall slow like the original. The Strode family, the life, trauma and its impacts theme is incredibly well crafted. In 2018, several reviewers highlight Curtis' performance for being the best of her career. I do recognize that Laurie Strode steals the scene, as this is the most well-developed and complex character of the movie. Laura's trauma can be felt with intensity in one of her best moments, during a dinner with her family. But it is important to pay attention on the relationship between the three main female roles. Despite of the negative reviews, in my opinion, Judy Greer does a extreme, difficult, and dangerous environment. She has spent her whole life being trained to defend herself from a predator in a confrontation. Possibly Myers-Greer's light dang helped me to buy her character's search for calmness. Andi Matichak is a sweet surprise too. She is definitely the next final girl we were all looking for. She is smart. She is strong. She doesn't depend on any man to protect her. And she also have the emotional control that helps to tie the family. The reflection of the 1978's events over the Strode's generations is certainly gold. Michael Myers, as much as Michael does not say a word in the movie. As expected, the famous serial killer was portrayed with minimalism by Jude Courtney, who learned a lot from the original Myers. Nick Castle Michael walks creepy, moves his head creepy, and stabs his victims with precision. The mask is also part of the magic. It looks like the original, but older in its quality and also in its facial traces. Looks like an old Myers look. The writing also allowed Courtney to bright as Michael without his mask. His blind eye shining in the dark like diamond is precious, and the killer is so brutal and dark that you feel scared of him again. Killing kids really makes you feel that there is no limit for him. John Carpenter and his team, that includes his son, created amazing scores for this movie. This is literally a paradise for the ears, besides of the immortal main theme that got a new version. There is a soundtrack played when Michael is chasing Laura's granddaughter that is thrilling. Laurie's score is also precious for sounding very 80-ish characters and versions. There are several moments in this film that Michael and Laurie are placed in each other's original spots. And there is a scene that Laura's granddaughter is at the school, and when she looks outside of the window, she sees Laurie SLB. There is a scene that Laurie chases Michael in a closet SLC. There is a scene that Michael pushes Laurie off the balcony, and when he looks down, Laurie is no longer laid down over the grass /2. There is a scene where Michael is shot by Lord Daughter, and Laurie attacks him at his back after coming out of the shadow. References to the other films after the bus crash. Michael kills a young boy in the car like Annie in Point One after being killed. One of the babysitters is dressed like a ghost like Michael in 01B. There is a sequence scene where Michael kills some random people in Haddonfield that is really similar to the beginning of 2C3. Kids are wearing the same costumes from 3 Vars D. Michael gets his mechanic clothes in a gas station like 4 There are 2 funny and dumb cops that are killed at the end, like 5F, the evil doctor who protects and possibly releases Michael from the bus. Looks like a homage to a character from 6SLG. There is a bathroom scene that is similar to another bathroom scene in H20. And Rob Zombie's Halloween Cell H, there is a victim that dies impaled on a gate like another character in Resurrection. The whole first act is amazing. The pre-credit scene showing Michael imprisoned and feeling the presence of his mask as a demonic alter ego is bone-shaking. The nostalgic credits recreating the original credits, but this time showing the pumpkin being rebuilt as a way to say that the franchise was being rebuilt was pure gold. The first appearance of 2018 Laurie Strode, the walk around Haddonfield, the introduction of the new characters, and Michael's escape from the bus, plus his ascension as the boogeyman, culminating in his first murders in Hadfield, work amazingly. The first act really puts you in the mood, but unfortunately the second act doesn't carry the dark tone on, and the suspenseful atmosphere is only recovered at the third act, which is strong and terrifying. This is the showdown of the confrontation of the decade the Strahd Sears, the terrible comedy in wrong moments and terrible comedian characters. If a character's line about peanut butter and his penis is not enough for you to think, what the F was that? So maybe a murder scene being destroyed by a smart-ass comical little kid that can't shut his mouth will be, and this happens over and over in H-2018, potential scary scenes are entirely destroyed by bad comedy that are placed in the middle of the execution of a suspense growth EX examples of pre-kill. Moment where a stereotyped funny teenager, Shelley from Friday the 13th Part 3, just can't stop talking with Michael Myers while he gets closer and closer in the dark. And another scene where two cops are having a conversation about sandwiches while Michael is approaching to Laura's house. There's no good comedian in this movie, and a lot of bad jokes are thrown to the audience in moments that were supposed to be scary. Too much of disposable characters included. While the first Halloween remains focused on a couple of interesting characters that we care about their fate, H-2018 throws over our face several disposable people that we don't care and we don't feel sorry for them. Some characters are not interesting enough, and even the other characters that are related to those people don't miss them when they die. There are also characters that exist only for the horrible comic relief or to enlarge the body count. The middle of this movie is a disaster in tone. All the suspense is suddenly gone after the brilliant first part. This happens due to two main reasons. One, we are directed to so many different places that we don't find much time to relate to one of them or to its situation. Everything happens so fast that you can't feel the mood. We go to a dance, to a babysitter house, to a garage for a useless funny scene, to a stupid walk on the street with two characters to Laurie chaining mirrors, or to a police car where two cops are having the worst line of the movie. And two, most of the criminal comedy happens in this act as a movie. It is above most of the slashers out there, a cut above the rest as a Halloween flick. Well, despite of the strong fan service, the Strode Arch, Jamie's acting, the beautiful cinematography delivered by David Gordon Green, and the amazing soundtrack that was also produced by the legendary John Carpenter. The biggest lesson that the master has taught us: don't show too much. And keep in the shadows is abandoned in most of the film. Overall, you will realize that you are watching a good fun movie that could have been a great horror testament. I left the theater without feeling complete, like some elements of the recipe were missing. This film, directed by David Gordon Green, written by Jeff Fradley, Danny McBride, David Gordon Green, produced by Mike O.V., Jason Blum, Bill Block, starring Jam Lee Curtis, Judy Greer, Andi Matichak, James Jude, Courtney, Will Patton, Virginia Gardner, cinematography, Michael Simmons, edited by Tim Alverson, music by John Carpenter, Cody Carpenter, Daniel Davies, production. Companies: Mymouth Blumhouse Productions, Tronus International Films, Rough House. Pictures distributed by Universal Pictures. Release date September 8th. 2018 in TIFF, October 19th, 2018, 18 in United States, running time 106 minutes. Country: United States, language English, budget $10 million, box office $29.9 million. So guys, this is the review of Halloween movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.